Hello everyone, and welcome back to Scary Tales, where we unearth the darkest corners of history to bring you the chilling, the twisted, and the terrifyingly true. If you're new here, get ready to dive into a story that will make you question everything you thought you knew about human nature. We upload once or twice a week, so if you enjoy today's tale, don't forget to grab that like button, throw it into a straitjacket, drag it into the basement, chain it up, and leave it to rot in the darkest corner of the internet. Tonight, we're delving into the harrowing history of one of America's most notorious institutions, Pennhurst Asylum. But before you think you know this story, let me assure you there's a twist so shocking it will leave you reeling. This isn't just another tale of an old haunted asylum. This is the story of how the darkest truths sometimes lie just beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. Officially known as the Eastern Pennsylvania State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic, opened its doors in 1908. Now, located in this quiet town in Spring City, Pennsylvania, it was designed to be a refuge for those who were considered unfit for society, the mentally disabled, the epileptic, and others with various disabilities. And back then, the concept of such an institution was seen as progressive. It was a place where people who couldn't care for themselves would receive the support and the education needed to live more independent lives. Now, the early days of Pennhurst were filled with hope. The facility was state-of-the-art for its time, equipped with classrooms, dormitories, a hospital, and even recreational areas. And the staff aimed to rehabilitate patients, offering them vocational training in hopes of integrating them back into society. And for a time, it seemed like Pennhurst might be a beacon of compassion in a world that often shunned the vulnerable. But as the years went on, the cracks in this idealistic vision began to show. And by the late 1920s, Pennhurst was already struggling with overcrowding. The original capacity of 500 patients was quickly exceeded. And by the mid-20th century, the institution was housing over 3,000 individuals. And the staff, initially optimistic, became overwhelmed and, quite honestly, disillusioned. The lack of resources, funding, and training led to an environment ripe for neglect and abuse, unfortunately. And the patients, who once had hope for a better life, now found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Pennhurst halls, once filled with the sounds of learning and laughter, became echo chambers of despair. Reports of abuse began to surface. Patients being restrained for hours, left in their own filth, or subjected to painful treatments that did more harm than good. Now, as the decades passed, the situation at Pennhurst grew worse. And by the 1960s, the institution's reputation had become so notorious that it attracted the attention of journalists and civil rights activists. Now, one of the most shocking revelations came in 1968 with the airing of the television documentary Suffer the Little Children, which exposed the horrific conditions inside Pennhurst to the rest of the world. This documentary, filmed by a local news reporter named Bill Baldini, showed the public the grim reality of life within Pennhurst's walls. Patients were filmed rocking back and forth, lost in their own worlds, surrounded by filth and neglect. The images were haunting: emaciated bodies, vacant eyes, and cries for help that seemed to go unheard. The documentary was a wake-up call to the nation, revealing the true extent of the suffering that had been allowed to persist behind closed doors. Now, the public outcry was immediate and intense. Lawsuits were filed, and the state of Pennsylvania was forced to confront the abuses that they'd been allowed to fester for decades. However, despite the growing awareness and pressure for reform, Pennsylvania remained open for nearly 2 more decades. The institution's problems were deeply rooted in the systemic failures of the time, which were underfunding, lack of oversight, and a societal tendency to marginalize those who are different. But beyond the physical and emotional abuse, there was another layer of horror that was slowly coming to light. A horror that was not just about neglect, but about the very philosophy that underpinned the existence of places like Pennhurst. And to fully understand the darkest aspects of Pennhurst history, we need to step back and look at the broader societal context in which it operated. See, the early 20th century was a time when the eugenics movement was gaining significant traction in the United States. Eugenics, a pseudoscientific belief system, advocated for the improvement of the human race by controlling reproduction. Now, the movement held that certain individuals, those seemed unfit, should be prevented from reproducing to avoid passing on their defective genes. Now, Pennhurst was not just a place of care, it was also a place where eugenic policies were implemented. Patients at Pennhurst were often labeled as unfit, not only due to their disabilities, but also because of their socioeconomic status, their ethnicity, or simply because they didn't conform to societal norms. And the sterilization of patients became a common practice, justified by the belief that it was in the best interest of both the individual and society. And the eugenics movement was backed by prominent figures of the time, including scientists, politicians, and even Supreme Court justices. As a matter of fact, in 1927, the U.S. Supreme Court case Buck versus Bell famously upheld the constitutionality of forced sterilizations, with Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes writing, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. And this ruling provided legal cover for institutions like Pennhurst to carry out forced sterilizations of their patients. Now, needless to say, the impact of these eugenic policies on the residents of Pennhurst was profound. Many patients were sterilized without their consent or even without their knowledge. And for some, this procedure was a condition for their release. If they wanted to leave the institution, they had to agree to be sterilized. This was presented as a treatment, but in reality, it was a violation of their basic human rights, just stripping them of their autonomy and their future. Now, by the 1970s, the tide began to turn against institutions like Pennhurst. Now, the civil rights movement, along with growing awareness of disability rights, led to increasing scrutiny of the conditions in these facilities. In 1974, a class action lawsuit was filed on behalf of the residents of Pennhurst, alleging that their constitutional rights had been violated due to the inhumane conditions and the lack of proper care. Now, this lawsuit, known as Halderman versus Pennhurst State School and Hospital, became a landmark case in the fight for the rights of people with disabilities. And this case exposed the widespread neglect, abuse, and mistreatment that had occurred at Pennhurst for decades. Now, it also revealed the institution's role in the forced sterilizations of its residents, highlighting the deeply ingrained eugenic ideology that had driven these practices. This legal battle was long and complex, but it ultimately resulted in a significant victory for the plaintiffs. And in 1981, the court ruled in favor of the residents, ordering the state to close Pennhurst and provide appropriate care for the residents in community settings. This decision marked a turning point in the way society viewed and treated people with disabilities. It was a recognition that institutionalization was not the answer, and that every individual deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Now, Pennhurst officially closed its doors in 1987, but the legacy of what happened there continued to resonate. The closure of Pennhurst was part of a much broader deinstitutionalization movement that saw the closure of many similar facilities across the country. Now, while this movement was a step forward in many ways, it also left a complex legacy. His former residents struggled to adapt in life outside the institution without adequate support. Now, this is the part of the story that'll make you question everything you thought you knew about Pennhurst and the broader system it was a part of. And everything I'm about to say is completely true. You can fact check me on this. Now, after Pennhurst closed, the site became a subject of intense interest for urban explorers, historians, and paranormal investigators. The abandoned buildings, decaying and overgrown, became a haunting reminder of the suffering that had occurred within their walls. But as researchers delved deeper into Pennhurst history, they uncovered something that few had anticipated: a chilling connection between Pennhurst and one of the most infamous atrocities of the 20th century: the Holocaust. It turns out that the eugenics movement, which had been so influential in the United States and had directly impacted the residents of Pennhurst, also played a significant role in the development of Nazi ideology. The pseudoscientific ideas that had justified forced sterilization and segregation in America were adopted and expanded on by the Nazis, leading to the horrific policies of extermination that were carried out during World War II. Now, many of the eugenicists who had advocated for sterilization and segregation were also involved in the international eugenics movement, and this is what influenced Nazi leaders. The infamous Nuremberg laws, which laid the groundwork for the Holocaust, were inspired in part, at least, by American eugenics policies. Some of the same scientists and policymakers who had supported eugenics in the US even visited Nazi Germany to share their ideas and strategies. Now, this connection between Pennhurst and the Holocaust is a stark reminder of how dangerous and dehumanizing ideologies can cross borders and have catastrophic impacts on a global scale. The story of Pennhurst isn't just about a single institution, it's part of a much larger and more disturbing narrative about how pseudoscience and prejudice can lead to unimaginable horrors. Now, as researchers continued to explore this connection, they found that several of the practices used at Pennhurst, such as forced sterilization, the classification of individuals as unfit, were directly linked to the ideas that fueled the Holocaust. The same underlying beliefs about racial purity, genetic fitness, and social control that led to the sterilization of patients at Pennhurst also contributed to the genocide of millions of people in Europe. Now, I'm not saying that America is responsible for the Holocaust, but the connection doesn't end there, okay? After World War II, some of the eugenic practices in the United States quietly persisted. Even as the world condemned the atrocities of the Holocaust, institutions like Pennhurst continued to operate under the guise of providing care while still implementing the policies rooted in the same eugenic ideology. The forced sterilization at Pennhurst didn't officially end until the 1970s, long after the horrors of the Holocaust had been exposed to the world. Now, after the closure of Pennhurst, the site itself became a place of fascination, of eerie fascination. The once bustling institution, now silent and decaying, was a reminder of the dark chapters of the history that it represented. The sprawling campus, with its abandoned buildings and overgrown pathways, attracted those curious about its past and those who believed that its troubled history had left a lingering presence. And, of course, over the years, Pennhurst has become a popular site for ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts, many of whom believe that the spirits of former patients still haunt the grounds. Tales of strange noises, shadowy figures, and unexplained phenomena have made Pennhurst a hotspot for those seeking a brush with the supernatural. Whether or not you believe in ghosts, there's no denying but the atmosphere of the place, steeped in tragedy and suffering, is profoundly unsettling. But beyond the ghost stories and the allure of the paranormal, the real legacy of Pennhurst lies in the lessons it offers about the dangers of dehumanization and the consequences of allowing fear and prejudice to dictate public policy. The history of Pennhurst serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of vigilance in protecting the rights and dignity of all individuals, especially those who are the most vulnerable. I will say in recent years, efforts have been made to preserve the history of Pennhurst and to ensure that the stories of those who suffered there are not forgotten. The Pennhurst Memorial and Preservation Alliance has worked to document the history of the institution, and parts of the site have been transformed into a museum, and they've even got a haunted attraction which tells the story of Pennhurst's past. These efforts aim to educate the public about the history of institutionalization, eugenics, and the ongoing struggle for disability rights. And so we come to the end of this harrowing tale, a story that began with a vision of care and compassion, but descended into a nightmare of neglect, abuse, and ultimately dehumanization. The story of Pennhurst Asylum is not just a cautionary tale about the dangers of institutionalization, but a reminder of how easily society can turn its back on those who need our help the most. So if tonight's story has left you shivering in fear and questioning the darkest corners of human history, don't let that like button escape your grasp. Grab your virtual straitjacket and tie it up in the comments section below. Then, dig a deep grave and bury it under a whole bunch of likes with a tombstone that reads, "Here lies the most disturbed button ever." And if you're thirsting for more stories that'll keep you awake at night, hit that subscribe button and make sure you don't miss a single upload. We dive deep into the most obscure and twisted tales, bringing you the truth that's stranger and more terrifying than fiction. So, once again, until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, sometimes the scariest stories are the ones